Guys, we have the pleasure of James Gaither today. And as you go, this isn't the first time around, and so I'm glad to have him back. But this nice man has a bio as long as your arm. He's been doing this for over 40 years. Let's see, 79 to 25, like 46 years as best I can tell, since he was ordained a Unity minister. Degrees in theology, philosophy and theology, two of those. He's written books. And besides being a professor emeritus at the New York ministry, he's also currently teaching at least four different places. Um, did I say two books? Um, Started the first radio show at Unity. Oh well, it keeps going, and we only have, an hour. So what do you say, James? If you would tell us what you have for us this morning.
All right. Well, first we're going to start with a meditation, and then I'm going to talk about what people get wrong about non-resistance and a little bit about what that teaching, its historical context, and what it tells us. So anyway, do you want me to just start and go ahead into the meditation? Is that the plan? It's all mine. Okay, great. Well, yes. Good morning. It's good to be with you all again, and recognize most faces and most names. So some of you don't have your pictures on. Hello. All right. So as I said, we'll start with the meditation. So I'll invite you to take a few moments to find a comfortable position. Just set everything aside. As we physically set things aside, we'll also mentally set things aside. The way I like to do that is to simply take some time to breathe, to feel, be fully focused on just breathing. Breathe with our lungs, but also every other part of our body is involved. Inhale, we let our stomach expand a little bit, and as we exhale, contract. We let our breathing take on a comfortable and natural rhythm. When we are aware of our breath, we also become aware of our connection with all life. We share an atmosphere with all living beings. We breathe in, we breathe out. We become aware that there is a rhythm in the universe. We tune ourselves physically, emotionally, and mentally to that rhythm. Inflow, outflow. We become conscious of our connection to all, to the earth, to the atmosphere, to the whole cosmos. There is no separation. There are distinct forms, perceptions, but each form and perception is also connected to the whole universe, and so we also are connected to all things in different ways. As we go deeper, we realize this interconnectedness, this oneness, with all that we perceive, like all that we feel and all that we think is in our minds. The universe is in our minds. The universe is in our minds. Think of it. And each person, each conscious being we encounter, the same is true for them. The universe is in their minds. So they perceive it from a different perspective and think about it in different ways. our minds are one with the infinite mind that knows all, the infinite mind in which there is that unity, the infinite mind encompassing all is undisturbed, pure state of peace and bliss. So we are one with that pure peace and bliss. We invoke it in our consciousness. We just hold the thought, peace, be still. Find this place of peace within us, this state of peace. In so doing, we become peace itself. I am peace. I invite you to know that truth right now. I am peace. So we go through our world and interact with others from this place of peace. Consciousness of unity. We are love. Unity of the infinite mind is experienced as love. And so we open our hearts to that limitless love, unconditional and all embracing and all pervading. We discover that we are capable of compassion, forgiveness, benevolence, kindness, charity, and a consciousness of oneness. I am love. As you know, I am peace. I am love. You move through your world as an influence for peace and love, just by your very being in the world. The reaction comes from that place. And because we are one with that infinite mind, we are one with perfect wisdom, limitless intelligence, perfect wisdom. There is a wisdom within us that guides us when we are still and receptive. We may call it intuition, we may call it spiritual guidance. We know it when we are still and it comes into our awareness. This wisdom is not simply a part of our being. It pervades our being as it pervades the universe. It is the source of order and harmony in the cosmos. We attune to it. We attune to order and harmony in our lives. I am wisdom. Whatever you need to know is now coming into your awareness. So knowing I am peace, I am love, I am wisdom, we know that we have all that we need within us. And in this consciousness, we are grateful. And we accept it as truth. And that's what it means to say, Amen. Amen. So it is. All right. Bring your attention gently back to this community, to this experience of community and experience of ideas. I once again thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you, and I have. As I see it, the ultimate goal of every religion and every moral philosophy is for everyone to experience the greatest possible good. Now, it turns out that it's very difficult to discern what the greatest possible good is, and that is why there are so many different religions and philosophies and, frankly, political parties. Running through all religions beneath the surface of the dogmas and the rituals, there is a stream of light and unity. That stream is called mysticism. It's an alternative worldview that beholds divinity and interconnectedness in all things. Mystical traditions within all religions hold that the consciousness of oneness is the greatest possible good. The consciousness of oneness is the greatest possible good. So your organization, your community, has a name that reflects the greatest possible good from the mystical perspective, the Center for Universal Oneness, right? This consciousness has been called different things in different traditions. It's called divine union, it's called nirvana. Jesus called this mystic consciousness the kingdom of God within us. And from this perspective, from this mystic perspective, we can respond to any injustice that we may see in the world, to war, conflict, from that consciousness. And it's responding from that consciousness of oneness. Our responses may seem counterintuitive at times to others. Injustice and war are caused by the illusion of separation. The illusion of separation is simply taking distinction to mean separation. My body is distinct in the cosmos, but it is not separate from the cosmos. My skin does not separate me from the world, it connects me to the world, and so on. We can operate from this consciousness of oneness. We can overcome this illusion of separation. Jesus looked through the conditions of his time. He looked through the illusion of separation in order to address the injustice and oppression of his time. His methods to creatively overcome that illusion are commonly referred to as non-resistance. And this teaching of non-resistance actually consists of tactics. And I believe his tactics have been largely misunderstood by most people. So we want to get some clarity about those tactics to see how we might apply them today. Part of Jesus' general strategy for developing a consciousness of oneness was to make friends with neighbors, and even with adversaries and enemies. The logic of this is simple and actually obvious, right? If everyone could become friends, producing a kind of global society of friends, the people of the world would help each other and behave towards each other in friendly ways. Such a global society of friendship would have no wars, would eliminate poverty, would provide the best possible health care for all, and in general would be peaceful and harmonious. It would, in effect, be heaven on earth. The misunderstanding of the so-called non-resistance teaching is twofold, right? Some imagine that the sayings are literal commandments rather than practical situational tactics. Jesus did not say, these are new commandments. There is no evidence that he was proposing new commandments from God. So there's really no reason to interpret these teachings as imperatives, if you will. They are tactics. The second misunderstanding is that the teachings are interpreted as having only a figurative or metaphorical meaning. Now, I think this perspective, interpreting the sayings in a metaphorical way, is legitimate and can provide a helpful perspective on things. However, if we just interpret the teachings figuratively, we don't really get at what Jesus was saying to the people of his times in his historical context. And so we miss some nuance of the meanings of what's called non-resistance. The, um, the literal sense of the sayings, without an awareness of the historical context, is basically irrelevant to our times, to our era. To understand what Jesus was saying to his audience, we need to understand the historical context. And once we understand those tactics in the historical context, we can perhaps discern new applications that are appropriate to our own era and conditions and to our own lives. And these new tactics we can use to create a broader and more connected society of friends. Now, Jesus' teaching to love God, to love your neighbor, was not new. It was part of the Jewish tradition at that time and other traditions as well. The teaching is not a strategy or a tactic even, but it's a mindset that is proposed in by Jesus, but also in many different ways in most religions. Jesus also said, love your enemies. This was new and, of course, paradoxical, but still it proposed an attitude, not a tactic, an attitude, a state of mind. Jesus had a strategy for promoting consciousness of oneness with God and humanity. His strategy was to teach how to heal and how to love, how to have faith. That's the overall strategy. So when we come to the teaching that's called non-resistance, that's found in the Sermon on the Mount, and some of it's found also in the Gospel of Luke. When we come to this teaching that's commonly called non-resistance, we arrive at the level of tactics. Tactics are specific ways to effectively respond to social, economic, and political oppression non-violently from a consciousness of love. Not simply non-violently, but again, effectively. So here then is that passage that we talk about as non-resistance. I'd like you to hear it in its sort of startling, literal sense. Hear the strangeness of it. Don't react violently against one who is evil. When someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other as well. When someone wants to sue you for your shirt, let that person have your coat along with it. Further, when anyone conscripts you for 1 mile, go an extra mile. When you are about to appear with your opponent before the magistrate, do your best to settle with him on the way, or else he might drag you up before the judge, and the judge turn you over to the jailer, and the jailer throw you in prison. Now, we need to understand, as I said, the historical context to see how these tactics might actually work in almost a literal sense. So first, turn the other cheek. Now, we understand a kind of metaphorical meaning to this. Don't respond to violence with violence. In his book, Discover the Power Within You, Eric Butterworth does a commentary on this section, and what he says about this idea of turning the other cheek is a sort of interesting and I suppose helpful perspective on its meaning. Eric writes, it certainly doesn't mean that we should become doormats or invite further assault. Jesus says, turn to the other side of your nature. You are both human and divine. There is that in you that can never be hurt, that is always poised and peaceful, that knows your spiritual unity with God and knows that no one can take your good from you. In this divine state of consciousness, the hurt is healed, the influence of the other person on you is nullified, and you become a healing influence upon him. Now, this interpretation by Eric Butterworth expresses really the general theme that's found throughout his book, which is basically develop your consciousness of your inner divinity, discover the power within you. And this theme is certainly consistent with Jesus' teachings as a whole, but there is something more specific that Jesus was suggesting to the people that he was addressing in a kind of literal way. So, what's the historical context? Well, again, the historical context you're all familiar with. The Romans occupied and ruled Judea and Galilee with an iron hand, often cruelly and unjustly. And it was also a time in which slavery was common. Now, a slap to the right cheek would be with the right hand, because that's everybody would only use their right hand, even if they're left-handed. A slap to the right cheek with the right hand would be a backhanded slap. Oh, right? Backhanded slap. Now, this backhanded slap wasn't simply an act of violence. It was one way that Romans and slaveholders expressed their sense of superiority and power. So to turn, and you would only do this, a backhanded slap, to someone you considered a social or other kind of inferior. So to turn the other cheek would put the slapper on the same level as the one who was slapped. Why? Because in a confrontation of equals, the forehand slap to the left cheek would at least acknowledge that the one slapped had equal status. Turning the left cheek would be a way of responding that said, in effect, if you are going to strike me as an equal, and I may choose to strike you back. All right. A shift in status, a shift in perspective on status. Turning the other cheek was a tactic to shift the perspective of the power balance. And it was a tactic specific to that historical context. But as you can see, I'm sure you understand, it's mostly irrelevant in our era at that literal level. So it's a specific tactic for a specific situation that have a specific meaning to those who are involved in that situation. Let's look at the next one. When someone sues you for your coat, give them your shirt. Okay, well, we kind of know the figurative meaning of that. We talk about people are so generous that they give you the shirt off their back, right? That's where where that sort of metaphorical or meaning comes from. It's basically, we take it to mean express generosity toward your adversary if necessary. Here's the historical context. It puts a little bit different spin on it. In those days, people only wore a coat and a shirt, those two garments that he's talking about here. So, person sued you for your coat and you also gave them your shirt, that would leave you naked. That's the image that arises. So here we see that these sort of extreme images can be humorous, and that's probably part of the intended effect. More to the point, culturally, leaving a person naked would bring shame and dishonor on the one who did it. It's one step too far, as we say. In the socio-historical context, honor in that historical context, honor was the most important thing. If you were seen as dishonorable, no one would do business with you. So a person who would strip someone naked, who would take their coat and their shirt, would be acting in a way that was seen as dishonorable and shameful, right? And then they would therefore have to do something to regain their honor, to cancel out the shame, so that they would once again be, seen in a positive way in the context of their society. So in this case, that might well be simply the person giving back the shirt and the coat. We don't know how any individual would respond, but in some sense, they would have to do something in order to erase the dishonor of what they had done. So we have sort of sense of honor and shame in our own society, but it's not as intense and all-embracing as it was in that historical context. And that's the thing that's sometimes hard for us to understand. So in those times, if you did someone a favor, let's say, the social expectation was that that person must return the favor. Otherwise, the if they didn't return the favor, that would be disgraceful. That would bring shame and dishonor. Again, very problematic in the context of the society. So favors were kind of the currency of friendship in that era. If you wanted to make a friend with someone powerful, the way to do that was simply to do them some kind of favor. And then the expectation was, well, that powerful person would have to do you a favor in return. That would really, in effect, practically force the one with power to return the favor and to form a bond of friendship. This bond of friendship wasn't necessarily a bond of affection. It was more like a bond of obligation, if you will, almost kind of like a contract, but still something effective, something that would shift the situation. Even today, there is a kind of social expectation that if you do someone a favor, they ought to return it. The social pressure is not nearly as strong as it was in Jesus's time, but we can kind of understand what's going on here. So on to the next one. Go the extra mile. So again, we understand the sort of metaphorical meaning. These phrases have become part of our common language, right? It just basically means do more than is required of you, right? That's the way we take it. And that figurative meaning is actually a very effective sort of policy or attitude to have in the context of family, in the context of business even. Going the extra mile can have benefits for relationships and even for careers. So this is historical context, again, Jesus' time, is basically, again, the same thing as when we've talked about with suing someone for your coat and you give them the shirt. In this case, it's even more specific to a particular relationship. And I'm sure you all know this. There was a law that required people to carry military equipment for 1 mile, Roman law. And so you had to do it. It wasn't like an option, right? So going the extra mile, now hear this, the going the extra mile would actually be doing that person a favor. Well, who was that person? That person would be a Roman soldier. So going the extra mile would be a way of creating this obligation of friendship on Roman soldiers, the people that were occupying their land and oppressing them. So I assume, although, it's really hard to find evidence for this sort of thing, but I assume that Jesus's followers tried to follow his teachings, his earliest followers in the area of Judea and Galilee. And so would have tried these options, especially the one of going the extra miles as a way of connecting with Romans. The only evidence for that is the simple historical fact that a whole lot of Roman soldiers became Christians. Now, where did that come from? I think it's entirely possible that the conversion of Roman soldiers in many cases was simply this act of nonviolent, we call it non-resistance, but it's actually an act of doing someone a favor and putting them in a social situation in which they were obliged to you, and then thereby creating these sorts of bonds of friendship. So they weren't acting at the level of, imperial offices and that sort of thing. They're acting at the base home foundational level, right there in their neighborhoods, right there in their location. They were making friends with Roman soldiers, with these, and I'm sure other tactics, other means. Now we can see that the metaphorical meanings can be applied to make friends. We can see that in a literal sense. The proposed tactics of Jesus in this case could work in the situation to which he was speaking, could be very effective. And we can also see that we no longer live in an era when the literal tactics are applicable. We aren't a people oppressed by foreigners or slaveholders who commonly slap us with impunity. That's not relevant to our historical context. We aren't sued for our coats, right? We're not, and we wear more than coats, right, and shirts, right? We are not legally bound to carry military equipment for a mile. So can you see that the teaching isn't really about, as Eric put it, it's not really about becoming submissive doormat, but about nonviolent strategies to oppose injustice and oppression and to make friends. In our era, we must find new tactics to nonviolently and effectively respond to social, economic, political oppression and injustice. And fortunately for us, in our modern context, at least in America, we live in a different kind of society and culture. In our era, the United States Constitution protects our rights to use nonviolent tactics as response to oppression and injustice. And most of it's right there in what we call the First Amendment, freedom of speech, press, and religion. We have a protected right to express minority viewpoints and opinions, to publicly criticize the government, right? If we see that the government or anyone else is trying to suppress that right, we have a right, next part of the First Amendment, to peaceably assemble. We can get together with like-minded people and demonstrate for our causes or protest different kinds of actions to make our case not only to the government, but to the larger public, to other voters. So we have this right to peaceably assemble as a nonviolent attack tactic to respond to what we may regard as injustice. And the First Amendment goes on, we have the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. We can make and sign petitions to demand the government establish justice, or to demand that they support certain policies that we favor, to argue for that. We can sue the government if we believe that it has violated any of our protected rights. So we have sort of, as part of our culture, nonviolent means to object to work against injustice, to work against oppression. So that's a wonderful thing, right? And beyond these constitutional rights, we've discovered sort of economic means to apply pressure to businesses and government officials, known as boycotts, right? You simply stop financially supporting certain kinds of activities until the producers or whatever get the message and start losing business. So these rights that we have are actually consistent with another approach that Jesus suggested for establishing justice, which is to simply persistently demand it. That was the point of the parable of the widow and the judge, where the widow, who doesn't have any political or any other kind of economic power, goes before this judge who kind of runs everything. And she just keeps pestering him and pestering him until he finally gives in. And basically what she says to him, in sort of literal way in the parable, is, give me justice. Give me justice. She goes back every day. Give me justice. Persistence, right? When we live in the world from this consciousness of oneness, a consciousness of love, we seek to respond to injustice and insults nonviolently from that place of love. However, we may not always know the wisest, creative way to do that. So, because tactics are situational, since almost every situation is different. Fortunately, again, as it happens, the commonly understood figurative meanings of these teachings that I discussed actually suggest situational tactics, right? We understand the figurative meaning of turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, giving the shirt off your back. When you turn the other cheek, sort of figuratively, excuse me, by ignoring or forgiving insults, you are freed at least from the anger and resentment. And in any case, you don't make the situation worse. Right? Giving the shirt off your back figuratively means being extraordinarily generous. This is one of the best ways we have, really, to provoke feelings of admiration and friendliness. When you're very generous, it's difficult for people to look at you in any way but in a positive way. When you go the extra mile, doing more than is required in a given situation, you certainly make friends. And if you are in business, let's say, you also make loyal customers by doing more than what is expected. It's just good business going the extra mile. So we may feel like we're in a situation where there's nothing that we can do about it, but that is actually never true. We do not have to accept injustice. We do not have to respond to violence with violence, because there is within us, as you already know, divine love and wisdom. This divine love and wisdom can guide us to know the best ways to nonviolently resist apparent evils. This wisdom and love, as we turn to it, as we develop it, as we become conscious of it, guides us in particular situations. There's no possible set of rules that can cover every situation. This is why developing our intuition, learning to be still and finding that and trusting it, that's why it's so important for us, because life is different at every moment. The point I would like to just make is that no situation is hopeless. What it looks like, no situation is hopeless. We are never powerless. We have a divine capacity to creatively and nonviolently overcome injustice. We have the freedom to choose peace in the face of war, because divine peace is already within us. We have the freedom to choose love in the face of hate, because divine love is already within us. We have God in us, and with God, all things are possible. God bless you. Thank you again for this opportunity to share some thoughts.